Hello team and welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan MSP. It's a Ukraine War Update Extra video giving you extra tidbits and nuggets to get your teeth into to give you greater understanding of the war in Ukraine. We're going to go to somewhere that I've been meaning to go to, well not physically, in mind if not in body, to Sudan. For the last couple of weeks I've been meaning to show this video and I meant to show it again this morning and didn't have it prepared. I don't know what happened there. It's been disappeared several times. Anyway, there have been several claims of activity over time by the Ukrainian fighters, in Sudan, of all places, active in Africa. And one might wonder why this is, why they're wasting resources, time and effort to fight Wagner in another country rather than put all their efforts into defending their own nation. But as I said this morning, there will be calculations that this is in their best interest. It may be something to do with stopping Russia from being able to secure monies from, I don't know, diamond mines or oil or whatever it is in these African nations. And Ukraine might be going there to stop that from happening so the money doesn't get back to Russia in order to finance the war, or some other reason, some other, I don't know, geopolitical, strategic, I don't know, whatever reason it may be, that you would assume that there has to be a good reason for them doing this, otherwise they wouldn't frivolously be using their troops to attack Wagner out of some, I don't know, maybe some kind of warped sense of retribution in Sudan. Nonetheless, you know, there is some video footage out there, various ones. This is one that's come out from the Kiev Post that shows Ukrainian special forces cleaning up Wagner fighters in Sudan. One of the videos purportedly shows Ukrainian operatives stalking the streets of the Afghan city and engaging Wagner fighters at close range with RPGs. I mean, this is, you know, proper, I guess, urban warfare stuff here. As you can see, a thermal imaging bit of footage here showing Ukrainians creeping around Sudanese, I presume, Khartoum, Sudanese cityscapes here. Anyway, I won't show you the rest of it due to all the usual reasons, but you can go and watch that. I'll link it in the video below. It's just interesting that Ukraine are taking this fight to Russia in places outside of the Ukrainian border. Second thing I'm going to go to today is this testimony from a Russian soldier who tells as it says here, tells a horrific story. He tries to escape twice, was caught and beaten, eventually along with others. He was sent to assault Ukrainian positions, but he refused. The Russian command insisted that the field was not mined. That was a lie. The Russians finished off those who survived the mines with mortars. This is their method to clear mines, simply barbaric. He eventually surrendered to a Ukrainian soldier. He refused to go back to Russia. He calls the place a fascist country. He does not have higher education. He's a construction guy, but he managed to figure out where his best interests are. So let's have a listen to what he, or at least a read. I'll read it to you because I know many of you listen to me whilst doing the housework or whatever, working, driving to work. I know that if I go there, he says, they will kill me. They say that Ukraine is fascist, but it is the opposite. It is Russia who are the fascists. I understand perfectly that I'm here now, like Christ behind the cross. I will better settle down here, help what I can do, dig or not dig. I am a gas welder, an electrician. I can lay stone, tile, etc. I worked in construction sites. I will better settle down here than go there, i.e. back to Russia. If I go there, they will start to torture me. What did I say? What did I show? Why do I need this? He says, it is not easy. Why do I need it? I tried to run away twice, and twice I was constantly beaten. I just saw that I was attached to a tree, and I was constantly beaten. I tried to run away, but when I was caught, they told me that if I got caught that day, they would cut me into pieces and put me in the ground and bury me, he says. They would feed me worms, that's it. You were lucky that you spent a month in Luhansk on the EOS. I spent a month in Luhansk on the EOS and I stole a car. And because of that, I held on to the last, he says. I was ready to sit in prison for 5 to 10 years, but I didn't want to go to war. Because when we were sent to the slaughterhouse, they said, like, the field is not mined, you can go. And when we went, I didn't go because I heard from the hearing that the field was mined, and the guys went there and lay there. Those who could crawl out, crawled out, and those who couldn't, they put their own mortars there because they couldn't pull out the 200 and 300, the dead and injured. They put a mortar there on purpose to break it. Obviously, translation is a bit dodgy in places, so there was nothing to pull out of there. He's talking about obviously the soldiers. I personally saw that they put it on the same field. Who could crawl out, crawled out. As he says again, people crawled out. The guys who had holes between their eyes, there was no eye. They crawled out without legs. And those who couldn't crawl out, they were simply thrown out by mortar all over the field. And then at the end, they said, "Oh, sorry, please, we forgot." Did we really mine? So there you go. That's his account. Obviously, take it with a pinch of salt, but that gives you an indication of the pretty horrific situation that many of these soldiers face, not only from being asked to charge at the enemy, but by incredibly suicidal orders from their own side. Right, I want to now go into a bunch of comments. Apologies for those who want to see lots of funky videos, but there's some really good comments from threads over the last few days, and it's worth sharing them, I think. So I talked about drones the other day and drone countermeasures, these electronic warfare systems that can take out drones and whatnot. Here is someone who is a bit of a drone hobbyist. Dogjutsu FPV. Anyway, the FPV in my name refers to my FPV drone hobby. So that's first person view drones that you look at the direction they're flying. So I feel comfortable labeling myself a SME when it comes to this. I build them from components, have raced competitively, and of course fly them for fun. Off-the-shelf FPV drones are typically quite different than camera drones typified by the DJI Mavic, etc. And just DJI is a Chinese firm that makes all sorts of quality drones and cameras and whatnot to go on the drones. But they make a lot of drones that are finding their way on both sides to the war. The typical DJI drone is highly automated, operates over a Wi-Fi signal that integrates control and video over a reasonably encrypted digital link. Has GPS, optical flow sensors, altimeters, etc. These can more or less fly themselves based on instructions from the operator, can auto return home, etc. A typical FPV drone is very manually piloted by the operator by providing roll, pitch, yaw, throttle inputs, and has no sensors beyond the FPV camera. Typically, their flight controller firmware will fail-safe on control signal loss, which cuts power to the motors and causes the drone to fall out of the sky. Though I would not be surprised if the fail-safe is bypassed when these are adapted for warfare. Even so, without active piloting inputs, even a drone with fail-safe disabled is not likely to stay airborne long without active pilot input. If I were to equate it to cars, a DJI drone would be a vehicle with all the modern safety features, driver assist, gadgetry, and full self-driving capability, while an FPV drone would be stripped down to a 1960s muscle car with a manual transmission. While recently the popular thing in FPV is digital video, all the FPV drone footage I'm seeing from Ukraine are from the tried and true analog video systems. It's literally an old school analog SD broadcast television signal, typically in 2.4 or 5.8 gigahertz frequency band. Off the shelf FPV analog video transmitters generally top out at about 1 watt of transmission power, and especially in a more common 5.8 gigahertz band, the range is not very long, though can be boosted somewhat by high gain directional antennas, etc., and is greatly impacted by things blocking the line of sight, trees, etc. The video signal can be picked up and viewed by anyone in range with an appropriate video receiver, which are dirt cheap and easy to obtain. So this goes back to how to, in the example I gave the other day, the Ukrainians get a montage of videos of Russian FPV drones that have fallen out of the sky and often into the river. And someone in the threads was saying, I was having this conversation on another channel where they were saying, well, we don't understand, surely they must be going and digging these drones out of the river. No, you can intercept the feeds which are sent back to the controller, but as I say, can be intercepted. These drones are use a separate remote control link, most commonly in the 2.4 gigahertz or 800, 900 megahertz frequency bands. That is a completely separate signal from the video. If they are simply using off-the-shelf components, which I highly suspect, these signals are not secured or encrypted in any meaningful way. Many of the RC protocols do frequency hopping, but because the protocols are well known, this is no way of a hindrance for anybody who wanted to take over the controlling. So one way of stopping being interfered is you can hop frequencies. So, you know, if you're just, this is how I understand it, if you're just interfering in a narrow bandwidth, you can hop to another one and you won't be interfered. And if you can keep hopping, then that allows you a greater degree of security. But I might be completely wrong. So based on what I'm seeing in that footage, so let's go. Yeah, there's no way of a hindrance to anybody actually wanted to take over the controlling. Yeah, so based on what I'm seeing in the footage, I suspect that these drones are being hijacked by simply identifying the remote control signal and transmitting a stronger control signal that drowns out the controller signal and sends roll or pitch inputs to spin the drone around whichever axis until it crashes. They simply record the separate video signal to document the event. The FP hobbyist could easily order the parts and build the equivalent of the FPV drones being used by both sides for $200 to $300, though I'm guessing bulk discount applies heavily, minus the explosives, of course. I suspect a large percentage of hobbyists could also interfere with or hijack the control signal of and crash somebody else's FPV drone if they were so inclined. It's not a complicated feat. If anybody has questions about FPV drones, I'm happy to answer them. So thank you very much for that. And actually, we have been hearing that there are many drones coming onto the market or being used that are in that kind of $400 range or $400 area. So that fits in with the $200 to $300 mentioned there. And I think that's going to be really important for the example the Ukrainians, but the Russians as well, for getting as many of these drones out there to do their jobs. They're very disposable in that sense. You use it, you know, compared to the cost of an Excalibur guided munition, that you can get, what was it, 1,500 of these drones, often to the price of one shell. And think how much damage 1,500 of these can do. Yes, a shell can in the right place be, you know, really, really potent, but 1,500 drones is nothing to sniff at, is it? Right, I'm going to now go on to another conversation we were having the other day of mortar versus direct fire. So mortars up and down. I talked a lot. Did he talk about this? Yes, this is what he talks about in this one. In fact, let him say it. So this is Mr. Grimshaw. Thank you so much. Great commenter and member. The main use of a mortar versus direct fire. Remember, direct fire is when you can see something and you shoot at it because you can see it, rather than up and down. That's indirect fire. You can't see what you're shooting at. So the main use of a mortar fire is the ability to hit targets on a reverse slope, rear hidden side of a hill by going up at a high angle, so you can come down on at a high angle. Hit it like if you had a much shallower trajectory, you wouldn't be able to hit just over the brow of a hill, right? Because of the nature of the angle of your shot. Hitting trenches with a howitzer doesn't require a direct hit. In fact, a close hit can often be more effective, giving a bigger kill radius from shrapnel as well as collapsing lengths of the trench. It depends how well these trenches are built, of course, as opposed to a single spot. Howitzer shells tend to pack this bigger punch over a longer range too. 1 or 2 men can carry a light 50mm or 81mm mortar and either are small enough and high angle enough that they could be sighted in a trench and fired from a trench as a defensive weapon on a pre-registered target. You've recorded all the parameters for a given preordained target, so you can call fire on them by name or to multiple mortars from different places as the need arises. And he says, again, I think it's a very good example of why such a broad range of weapons is typical in any army. They do different things and have subtle differences in advantage and disadvantage. It helps people understand, too, why there's neither one single salvation weapon for all seasons, nor even necessarily a silver bullet for one situation. Yeah, really good point. Thanks, Mr. Grimshaw. Great comment there. And I love the level of expertise. I have, you know, people who are former military men, people who are presently military men, people who are drone experts. Whatever your expertise is, please, you know, bring them to bear in the threads here. And I'm just going to go now to me old mucker Mitch Mazarol from the United States of Canada, from Canada, and he's been absent for a bit, but he's there, always there. So thanks, Mitch. Now, this is in the context of me talking about military aid from different countries and saying, well, the US gives all this, but then criticizing the US in some way over their politics, and then saying the UK was really good at the beginning, but actually has gone off the ball and has been surpassed by Germany. Germany now doing really well. They did really badly at the beginning. They're now doing really well. France, not too sure. I mean, they give a lot of money to the EU, so they give a lot in that way. But as far as their military assistance is concerned directly, not quite sure. They keep a lot of things pretty secret. I know they do a lot in terms of satellite provision and intelligence and so on and so forth. Anyway, there's all this kind of stuff. And people are having a go at me for dissing the UK. And I was like, I haven't dissed the UK. In fact, the UK have been brilliant, but we've just gone off the boil. And we're going to speak about that in a second. But Mitch came along and said this, and thanks, Mitch. He said the good old ranty argy-bargy in this vid concerning aid given and credit due made my morning. It's good to be reminded that all of the donor countries that are supporting Ukraine to one degree or another come with some internal political baggage in hand, notwithstanding some, at times for reasons mysterious to the wider audience, slow walking of aid commitments. So this is the US. The US has done an amazing job. Without the US, Ukraine would be stuffed. But then there's still slow walking things like ATACMS and this and that. And it's the idea that, do you know what? It's not just this simple understanding that it's just good and bad. Oh, you're brilliant. Poland is brilliant. UK is brilliant. America is brilliant. Or, you know, America's not brilliant. And Poland's not brilliant at the moment, or UK's not brilliant. No one says that. It's like brilliant here, but not so good here. Good here, but yeah, there. And he goes on to kind of lay this out really nicely. Not a perfect world by any stretch, but a pedantic interpretation of perceived national faults, or to be more charitable, an overly simplistic analysis with clearly biased anecdotal examples of aid given does little to further the goal of assisting Ukraine sink Russia's imperialistic aims. JP is on point here, I think. It's more than fair to be critical and vocal about it too when a country is missing the mark on what they could possibly be doing, but it's also important to make note and recognise when they are stepping up and delivering. Both can be happening simultaneously with one nation with various aid components, and these are not mutually exclusive situations. In other words, a nation can be like, oh, really good in the amount of tanks you've given, but actually you should be given these missiles as well, and you're not. So that's really good, but this is not so good. I'm kind of making stuff up here, but you get the point. Or really good with humanitarian aid, but not so good with military assistance, so on and so forth. Things are complicated and nuanced. This idea that it's just brilliant or just bad is simply not good enough, I don't think. So thank you for pointing this out, Mitch. He says governments generally can walk and chew gum at the same time, but there are times when they do neither perfectly. And that's the same with us in our evaluations. You know, we're not very good at understanding that nuance and evaluating accordingly. And that's why I've been attacked for being too critical of the UK, and by other people not being critical enough at the same time, because actually I am critical at certain times but not in other situations. And it has to be noted that I'm no fan of the Conservative government, but I'm just about to give Boris Johnson some kudos, and let me tell you, I've not been his biggest fan. But the thing about UK political situation with regard to Ukraine is that, as I said earlier in a video earlier today, we have really strong bipartisan support for Ukraine, which means that no matter which party gets in the next election, we won't have a problem with continuing to support Ukraine, I don't think. And this can't be said for many other nations around the world. The US is a great example where not all, but there is a component of the Republican Party that is being increasingly vocal about the support that the US is giving to Ukraine and being a little bit negative towards that and trying to stop it. There are other nations as well where you have parts of the political spectrum in those countries that are more lenient and more sympathetic towards the Kremlin and towards Russia. That's not the case in the UK. We've had the experience of Litvinenko, Skripal poisoned in Salisbury, Litvinenko in London, if I remember correctly. We're not big fans of Russia. The only problem with us is that we've had Russian money laundered through the UK consistently for the last 20 years, and that is a big challenge to us, and certainly with how some politicians might view Russia, but it hasn't got in a way. And people were expecting Boris Johnson at the beginning of this war to be compromised by that very issue. But he came out of the blocks really strongly in defense of Ukraine. And that is something to be congratulated with him. Here's an example. Boffin George, and who supports the channel and everything. Please stop knocking UK provisions to Ukraine. It will come out in years to come that the UK assistance has been beyond any country ever will. I mean, thank you for the comment. It's just empirically incorrect. Like, our assistance has not been beyond any country, what any country ever will. So for a start, Germany has bilaterally given more than us. The US has bilaterally given more than us. And by GDP, other countries have far outstripped us, and by population, by per capita, other countries have outstripped us. So there are lots of metrics. In fact, in all of the metrics, the UK is not number one. And so therefore, that is just an empirically incorrect statement. And I'm not knocking UK provision. The UK has done a magnificent job, particularly at the beginning of the war. What I've said is that they've slowed down. And it's not just me saying that. It is the same conservative politicians who were involved in those early times of giving lots of aid saying that. So let's go to what Boris Johnson, who was the Prime Minister responsible for that quick out the blocks aid to Ukraine, has said this. I mean, this is a month ago now, a month plus. Boris Johnson attacks UK aid to Ukraine. What the hell are we waiting for? So, don't take it from me, some lefty liberal. This is coming from a very right-wing former Prime Minister who was responsible for that aid initially. So, a former Prime Minister who formed a close relationship with Ukraine's Zelensky after the outbreak of the war with Russia called on the UK to provide howitzers and artillery weapons, Storm Shadow cruise missiles, and, quote, as much help as we can give them with drone technology. Writing for The Spectator magazine, a very right-wing publication, which he used to edit, Johnson said it could be a, quote, relatively trivial outlay for extraordinary potential reward. Totally agree. If Western nations were to provide more military support, he called for a, quote, far greater sense of urgency about the programme of military assistance. This is exactly what I've been saying. Quote, I have asked it before and I ask it again. What the hell are we waiting for? Johnson wrote. He said Ukrainians did not want warm words, but, quote, weaponry to finish the job. And so I simply do not understand why we keep dragging our feet. Why are we always so slow, he said. How can we look these men in the eye and explain the delay? Throughout this war, we have underestimated the Ukrainians and overestimated Putin, and we are doing the same today. So I go back to this. It will come out in years to come that UK assistance has been beyond any country ever will. And we have Johnson saying, well, what the hell are we doing? This is rubbish. Someone's not right here. Johnson directed his message not just at the UK, but the US and other Western nations, as well as global swing voters such as India. And he's completely right in doing so. Quote, if Putin wins and all he has to do to claim a victory is hang on to at least a chunk of the territory he has taken since the 24th of February 2022, the dreadful message will go around the world that this was the moment when the democracies pledged to stand up to the autocracies and we flunked it. He wrote, the story of Ukraine will be of lion-hearted Ukrainian troops finally betrayed by Western loss of nerve. End quote. No Western country has provided any troops to Ukraine, but the US has provided military assistance more than $43 billion or 34 billion pounds since the start of the Biden administration, and more since, indeed. The UK is a second largest donor. That's not true anymore, having committed 4.6 billion in military assistance to Ukraine so far, although it depends whether you're talking just military assistance or in terms of humanitarian and financial assistance as well, including 2.3 billion pounds in 2022 and a commitment to match the funding in 2023. It is also involved in a program of training 30,000 new and existing Ukrainian personnel by the end of the year. Absolutely true, although that does involve other nations too. We provide the place for the training, but it's not just the UK providing the training, just to be accurate there. Britain is providing long-range precision strike missiles and has recently committed to training Ukrainian fast jet pilots, but has said that combat fighter aircraft will not be provided for the moment. And then you've got Grant Shapps getting involved. So part of the problem with the UK is the Defence Secretary at the time, Ben Wallace, knew that he was leaving and then kind of went a bit quiet. He'd done a brilliant job, and I lauded him, even though I don't agree with his politics necessarily, but I've lauded him for the job he did with regard to Ukraine. But then he tailed off as is like, right, I'm quitting being an MP, basically. So that was that. And basically, they were redrawing boundaries, and I think his boundaries going to disappear, and that meant that then was a good time to stop. So Grant Shapps took over, who doesn't have many plaudits really, but he's actually been very much, at least vocally and politically, in the right place. The question is whether he can follow that up with actual tangible assistance to Ukraine, and that's going to depend largely on the Treasury, on budgeting, on Rishi Sunak's will as well. So I think Rishi Sunak is not the kind of leader that Boris Johnson is or was. He's not the sort of gung-ho kind of person that is much more comfortable on the international circuit. Rishi Sunak is not that. He's got his expertise in the Treasury, but he's much, I think, more comfortable pulling strings from home and concentrating on domestic things than being some big international diplomat. And that's unfortunate, because really that's what's needed in terms of Ukraine at the moment. Anyway, that's an awful lot of talk about UK politics and just me answering critics, which I think is useful. I think it's useful to understand the nuance here, that so many nations are doing an absolutely fabulous job, and we should congratulate them for that. Yes, Germany sent 5,000 helmets at the beginning, and they were nothing short of absolutely shite, right? But that's not now. It's like, you know, if Arsenal beat Man City 3-1 after going 1-0 down, you don't at the end of the match go, Arsenal are rubbish. God, do you remember when they were 1-0 down? They are rubbish. What a rubbish team. Yeah, but they just won 3-1 after playing really well in the last 2/3 of the match. Yeah, but I'm only going to remember their first third of the match. No, you don't do that. And you don't do that. So they are doing well now, and we should congratulate nations that are doing well now. And the UK, we should acknowledge that the UK have done brilliantly in the same way we acknowledge that Arsenal played poorly in the first third. We should acknowledge the UK have done brilliantly and just hope and demand, really, that the UK continues to do that going forward. And that's going to be the challenge, because we have proximity biases where you remember the most recent thing more than you do the stuff before. And with regard to the UK, we just hope that they don't rest on the laurels of doing well at the beginning and try and coast on that, and actually that we do help. We are, at the end of the day, the 5th richest nation in the world, but, well, arguably the 6th. I think there are claims that France has overtaken us now. Post-Brexit, there are figures that have changed and whatever. I don't want to get into the long ways of that, but we're the 5th or 6th richest nation in the world. We should be helping in line with that, as all nations in that group are, which is why I said earlier, you know, Italy's a funny one where they've talked good talk and Meloni's done a good job, but actually, have they provided as much stuff as the size of their economy would dictate? And the same with similar nations in similar positions. Anyway, that's enough of me like banging on. You get the picture. We need a nuanced understanding. We need to congratulate when it's warranted and criticize when it's warranted. And sometimes you do both of those things at the same time. Well done to this nation here, but not so cool here. Or well done at this point in time, but at that point in time, not so cool. Here endeth the lesson.